Okay, welcome everyone to the People's Water Board Water Wednesday. We come on every Wednesday at noon to talk about the important water issues and water struggles happening throughout Michigan and throughout the nation, throughout the world sometimes. So we're really grateful for everybody who tunes in every week. Please share this out and leave comments below so we can have a real conversation. I'm here with Nicole Hill. She's part of the People's Water Board webcast thing that we do I'm messing this up. I'm sorry, guys, I'm tripping. And I'm also here with Peter Hammer, Dr. Peter Hammer. He's a professor of law at the Damon G. I messed this up. I'm sorry. The Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights, and he does a whole bunch of stuff. But also, he's a water warrior. He's been working with the People's Water Board for years and years and years, trying to get the Water Affordability Plan implemented here in the city of Detroit. So we're really grateful to have him here and to be having this really important conversation. Right now, more than ever, we really need a water affordability plan implemented. As folks know, the water affordability or the moratorium on water shutoffs ends in 2022. So having something in place before that happens is vitally important. It really is a life or death situation for folks. So thank you for being here, Dr.
It's my pleasure. And I want to thank you, Valerie, Jean, and Nicole for having me, but also for all the good work that you do and the work that everybody's doing with the People's Water Board.
Thank you. So we're going to get right into it. What were some of the reasons that you started working with the People's Water Board and you all started developing and thinking about the Water Affordability Plan?
Yeah, well, two pauses. One is that we inherited from giants and geniuses in Detroit the Water Affordability Plan when I started working in about 2012, 2010. And so the template was there. So this is an area, unlike many problems, where we know what the answer is. And we've known what the answer is for a long time. But sometimes I think it's helpful for some of the folks that don't have the history to really understand why water prices are so high in Detroit. And if you'd let me, I can just sort of talk a little bit about the legacy of spatial structural racism that we've inherited that have really given us the water problem. So it's not a problem that just came from nowhere. It really started with the resegregation of the region. The segregation used to exist in Detroit in segregated neighborhoods. And we went through a 60-year period where we resegregated ourselves at a regional level, including, sort of what I call the theft of the Great Lakes Water Authority, the theft of the Detroit Water and Sewer Department with the Great Lakes Water Authority, which now means that Detroit, which is a shrinking city going from 2 million to now just a little over 600,000, has to shoulder the cost of the oldest and most expensive part of the regional water system at the same time that Detroit Water and Sewer Department created the wealth that's in the region, right? So there's all sorts of interesting history and inequalities, but that notion of a shrinking rate base covering the oldest part of the water infrastructure for a city that is 1/3 the size it used to be is at the core of that. And that's a whole issue of racial inequity at a regional level. So we have to say, how do we get more equity? And the Water Affordability Plan is just one piece of a very important puzzle.
Right. The way that it's set up now, with the $25 and things a month that people have to pay right now, and then with the moratorium, what are some of the things that you're worried about?
Yeah, that I mean, we're dealing with a city that has multiple challenges, including endemic poverty, which I always say is a result of no jobs, right? It's not that people aren't working, which is a history of deindustrialization, which is similar to that racial resegregation at a regional level. But at a basic level, we have to say what's necessary for life, all right? Water's necessary for life, right? Food and shelter are necessary for life. Clean air is necessary for life. And we got to strive to live in a society where all of our citizens and all of our residents, I should say, are provided the things that are essential for life. And by shutting water off and making water unaffordable and leaving a regional structure that is going to guarantee that water affordability is going to be a huge problem for Detroit for decades, we're not even beginning to look at the real solutions that might address people's really, as you said, life and death needs.
Yeah. What kinds of things are stopping us from, or what kind of entities rather, are kind of stopping us from this, from implementing this really, really important water affordability plan?
Yeah, I mean, the same ones that killed it in the beginning, right? So we sort of go back and think about the broader history at the turn of the century, when people like Marianne Mahaffey were fighting for it, and Joanne Watson and Helen Moore created a water affordability plan that in a slightly weakened form was adopted as law, right? And we went through a short period of time where it was actually implemented with limited effectiveness, and then it was completely abandoned, right? So ironically, the law in some respects is on the books, but there isn't the will, right? And the whole notion, as we go back to emergency management, that the newest wave of water shutoff started when Detroit didn't have democracy and was imposed by an emergency manager. Many claim, I think, properly, in order to clean up the books so that the water system might be privatized. So there's this whole history of indifference. I often say that, we have to center the discussion where people and not property are at the core of our vision of what politics and society and development are. And I think from the emergency manager onward, we've had people in power who don't care about the folks that are looking at this as a monetary question and a bottom line. And we need to change that, right? So it's really politics that needs to change, which means that the people have to start organizing and getting the power to either elect new people in office who are going to be supportive of it, or pressure sufficiently the people who are in office to adopt a really common sense proposal that both produces more revenue and more equity, right? And it's very seldom do you get a policy option that gives you both more money, right, revenue for the revenue base, but also is producing more equity.
Right, and that's what the Water Affordability Plan does.
Yeah, and if I could pause, and I don't want to get over technical, so people sort of understand the simple logic behind it, right? It's just a form of price discrimination. And what price discrimination says, and everybody who's ever flown on an airline knows it, that different people are charged different rates relative to different characteristics, right? And if a monopolist can price discriminate, what they can do is actually get more revenue from those who have the greater ability to pay. And that's where the more money comes in, right? If you shut somebody's water off, you're not getting any revenue from them. Right. So it's a lot better to be getting a little bit of revenue, what they're able to pay, some reasonable percentage of what their income is, 2% or the other UN standards. And that gives you money from the people who have a little bit to pay, who otherwise would be shut off. At the same time, you have a system in place where I grew up. We thought that if you had more, you should be giving more. Right, and it indulges that communitarian values that say the people that are blessed with greater resources should be contributing socially to those resources, and the Water Affordability Plan enables that. But then we keep hitting these walls.
Nicole, you had a question, didn't you?
Yes, I just wanted to know, in your professional opinion, what do you think will continue in Detroit, or what will happen to Detroit residents if this plan is never implemented?
Yeah, we will have an increasing water crisis, right? Sometimes economists talk about insurance markets that go through a death spiral, right? Where you increase the rates, it's less affordable, so less people buy the product, which means that you have a smaller base, which means you increase the rates again, which means that more people can't afford it, so they don't buy it. And it's the same dynamics of the auto insurance, right? So I want to sort of think about two things that aren't normally put together that really are very similar in the structure of the downward spiral. The water system and the auto insurance are very similar. So what we're going to see in Detroit is this is an endemic problem, and it's a problem that's going to get worse. And either we're going to be shutting water off for more people, which we know the humanitarian crisis that produces, or we're going to sort of limp along with these assistance plans, right? And it's also important that your listeners understand that assistance is not affordability. Assistance is a Band-Aid, which means that you're dependent upon the largesse of those that, would give you that assistance, right? It is very patronizing. It is very kind of missionary in its nature of saying that I've got these resources, and if you're very good people and behave, I will give you a little bit of assistance, but it does nothing about the structure of the problem. So we have to really think about structural solutions. And I would also say it's important to distinguish between a Detroit water affordability plan and a regional water affordability plan. And they're two separate things, and they may be stepping stones to each other. But the real end game, if we're going to get to the root causes, is regional equity, which means not only a water affordability plan in Detroit, but a water affordability plan that would include the entire region as an effort to redress that kind of spatial structural racism that we inherited as we resegregated the region at a regional level.
You talked about there not being any will to do this, which always, to me, that's the biggest thing. Like without the will, the mayor, the city council, they really have been, holding this. They've had the ball in their court for a long time. As far as this goes, we've been fighting in the street for a long time. I know that people are trying to figure out a way to elect a new mayor and things. As far as putting pressure on them to be able to putting pressure to make them and force their hand to do the right thing when it comes to water affordability. What kind of things do you think that we could do to really pressure them?
I mean, you got to get people engaged, right? But this is where it becomes problematic, because the people who are likely to have water shutoffs are suffering, right? They're struggling with multiple forms of challenges and difficulties and traumas. And you kind of think through histories of social change. Change has typically been motivated and driven by the middle class, right? Because they have the time and the luxury and the ability to oftentimes put pressure, right? Change seldom comes in poor countries, right? Because the people are so oppressed, right? So I first want to put it in a context where we understand who's to blame, right? And it's the structures that have created the endemic poverty and the multiple challenges that estrange people from political systems that are responsible for the lack of a more effective social movement in Detroit. Right. And again, it's this notion of needing to have right diagnoses before you can get, action. But we've got to deal with the cards we have. Right. And we got to remember that Detroit has always been filled with amazing social innovators. And the Water Affordability Plan is just one of the examples of that social innovation. And I think about the energy that almost gave us a real community benefits ordinance, right? So we've done that post-emergency management before. I think about the energy that gave us the revised city charter and all of the intelligence, the innovation, the hard work that went into that. So we know it's there, right? But we've got to get people who are going to ask, what has government ever done for me? And the answer is almost nothing. To see value in mounting a political campaign to actually change that government. And you guys are close to the people, the challenges, you have the discussions, but we've got to be able to convince that, because if we can't get the grassroots power, we're not going to change the establishment, and we know the establishment doesn't care, right? Yeah. And I can't think of anything more brutal than turning somebody's water off, and not just an individual, but 100,000 plus households, where children and elderly, and it's hard for me to get my mind around how somebody could do that, right? Yeah. And if that's the people that we're dealing with, we know ultimately we're going to have to put new people in those positions who will be stewards of that authority and actually wield government policy in ways that are effectively addressing the needs of the people.
The cruelty of it is,
please go.
Yeah, the cruelty of it
all,
when
callous, cold-hearted.
Whole neighborhoods get shut off. I witnessed it myself, watching my whole neighborhood get shut off. We're years past that, and still dealing with that trauma. of having their water shut off and having our whole neighborhood shut off at one time, and all of us kind of collectively coming together. There was that part of it, right, where collectively we all came together to take care of each other in that moment for weeks until everybody got their water turned back on. But the trauma, it never goes away.
And there's a lot of lasting effects, not just psychologically, but physically, from living through water shutoffs. I can attest to that. When they were shutting off in my neighborhood, like, I literally am classified as having a compromised lung system now because I contracted bacterial pneumonia when my water was off. And it was directly because of the irritants from using undiluted cleaning products to try to make sure that my house stays sanitized. But the question that I wanted to ask is that I often hear in this work that we do that they want the city or the elected officials want to see how this plan is going to work out before they implement it. And they are always waiting on other cities that have similar plans. But what they don't realize, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, the same plan that we're pushing is the plan that was implemented in Philadelphia and in Baltimore.
Yeah. No, and where did they get that? They got that from Detroit.
That's
Right? So we're no longer exporting automobiles, but we are exporting great social ideas still.
right.
So this is the great irony. They're saying, well, we want to see what's happening over there. Well, when Philadelphia and Baltimore wanted to learn how to solve their water problems, they looked to what Detroit did 20 years ago, right? And they say, well, that makes common sense. And it is common sense. That's why sort of people understand that sort of communitarian value. It simply says you give what you can, right? And if you have more, you give more. Right. And that very basic common sense produces more equity and more revenue. And Philadelphia said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Right. Baltimore said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And yet in the very city that killed that idea 20 years ago is now saying that we got to find somebody else to tell us what to do. Right. Well, we know what to do and we've done it before. And that's just excuse making.
It is.
Right. And, it's also excuse making to kind of say they don't have the legal authority. They're full of excuses. They're not full of action. And we really need people who are going to be acting in the public interest. And all I've seen is a lot of excuses. Right?
Mm-hmm. And harm.
And
they
harm, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's what did move them, right? What moved them was a global pandemic where, the inability of people to stay healthy in Detroit would hurt others. Right. So they're not I think properly framed. And I will stand by this because January before the pandemic, the governor rejected a petition to get the public health department to declare a public health emergency in Detroit because of the water shutoffs. Right. And in that scenario, look who gets hurt. Right. It's only the people in Detroit that get hurt. It's only the people with the water shut off that get hurt. When you have COVID or you have these other diseases, and there are multiple diseases, so I don't want to say it's only COVID. You have hepatitis that we've had a wave through. So there's multiple contagious diseases, but it was only when the contagion became serious threat to others, non-Detroiters, that the political establishment decided that we better let you wash your hands, right? Because we don't want to get hurt. And again, that underlines that theme of cruelty and whose interests are at stake. And it's just, I haven't dealt with any issue in my life that I have felt so motivated on because it is such an obvious issue of life and death. And yet we have huge, powerful institutions that are willing to stand and do nothing.
Mm-hmm. The governor very publicly came out and spoke against the city charter too, the new drafted city charter.
And these are connected.
Over again that she does not care about Detroiters in any way.
No, so what people need to start seeing is the through lines, right?
Yeah.
So the most obvious destruction of democracy in Detroit was the emergency manager, right? Which then enabled the bankruptcy, which then enabled the creation of the Great Lakes Water Authority, right? So these things, again, are interconnected. When democracy started to come back in Detroit, the first example of that, in my mind, at a grassroots level, was the community benefits ordinance fight, right? And the same forces who fought Proposal P, right, that dark money, the same voices tried to kill that after stalling for years before it would ever be considered. And it was only considered because people got enough signatures of Detroiters to put it on the ballot referendum. And then when Detroiters come back and what I call the sort of second resurgence of grassroots democracy, which is the charter revision, those same exact forces behind emergency management, behind killing the community benefits ordinance, killed the charter revision in Proposal P, right? So democracy is under assault in Detroit, and these are not isolated incidences, right? There's a notion I call, everybody worries about voter suppression, and we should be worried about voter suppression. What happens in Detroit is voter pre-suppression, right? Where you're not even allowed to have a choice, let alone have a real vote. And that to me is worse than what's happened in Texas, in Georgia, and Florida. The democracy is being suppressed in Detroit far more seriously than it's being suppressed in any other city that I'm aware of.
So, I mean, we're the ones who won the election in a lot of ways because out in droves. Yeah, that's why they try to squash us, because when we come together, we're a movement city. When we do organize, we pull people, you know, we will get people to the polls. And that really scares the establishment, I think, because they know. Then they try so hard to suppress our votes. I really believe that they know how much power we hold. They do. And
that message has to be spread, you know, because, a lot of people in Detroit don't feel the power, and they should, right? They deserve to. And those things, again, are connected. But nobody should ever underestimate what Detroit is capable of. I look at the city charter and I see brilliance. Right.
Brilliant.
And nothing's perfect, right? So, I mean, it would have to be tinkered with and fixed, and we'd find what worked better and we'd find what worked less, and we'd adjust the things. But we don't need perfection. We need appropriate directions. Right. And the charter was full of just so many appropriate directions for the city to be going to that would address these root causes, right? I keep coming back to, if we're not addressing the root causes of the problem, we're never going to find a solution, and indeed things will get worse, right? And I hate saying that, right? But I think that's the most honest assessment. If you look at the nature of the problem, you look at contemporary politics, they are so mismatched, right? They are so disconnected that I don't see any of the policies adopted in the last 10 years that are making any significant difference in real people's lives.
No,
exactly.
Even when the moratorium, when they first, and I know the system, when I first heard it, that Mayor Duggan had called a 2-year moratorium on water shutoffs, for about 1 minute, I was relieved. And then it hit me. This isn't, and now here we are, we're knee deep in that moratorium. It's about to be let up soon in the next 6 months or so. Everybody I know is robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? And if they don't have to pay a bill, they know it's not going to get shut off. They end up not paying it because they can't afford it, right? They can't. They're like trying to make sure DTE stays on and things like that. So I just think that we're going to be in the middle of mass water shutoffs the second that moratorium is lifted, and they're not going to be mass water shutoffs with just small amounts of money. You're talking about stuff that's accumulated over months and months and months now.
Yeah.
Moratorium in December 2020. So that, you're talking about months.
I mean, the precursor will be the end of the moratorium on eviction.
Yeah.
And that is going to be a suggestion of how bad the water shutoffs are going to be.
That's already showing to be a very devastating wave of events, because in my neighborhood, I've seen more moving trucks than I've ever seen the whole 5 years I've been over here. Like, my neighborhood is literally becoming a ghost town because a lot of these people, and a lot of them are immigrants, because I live on the border of Dearborn. And a lot of these people don't completely understand how this is working. City officials are not taking the time to explain that to them. And we saw that when the governor and the mayor decided that it would be a good political move to institute the $25 plan. I don't know if you remember, Val, but when we first started, they didn't even print flyers in any other language but English. And it was activists like our organization that demanded that we need this at least in Spanish and Arabic as well. You know, and then they're like, oh yeah, maybe that is a good idea. But that was only after we as activists had already translated these flyers about getting on this plan into those other languages.
It's the same
And
moratorium on
the same with the moratorium on evictions. Like,
yeah.
a lot of people I've spoken to didn't even know there was a moratorium on evictions. It was just simply like, I have to institute my own moratorium because I simply can't afford all my bills right now. I'm not working.
Right.
You know, and so they don't realize that what a moratorium means and what happens when it's lifted. Because a lot of them are not very fluent in English, or a lot of people just simply don't understand why.
Who are fluent in English don't understand.
Exactly.
They pull the look. They intentionally leave the information out. They do. We know that they do. That they purposely don't want people to know their rights. That's why we started putting out the People's Water Board, the People's Platform. All of us kind of got together and we started putting out, like you said, flyers with that explain people's rights in different languages, because people just had no clue. They just didn't know. Right. My biggest fear right now is, well, let's think about the correlation of this, the moment we find ourselves in 2014, after we went through entire spring and summer of mass water shutoffs, like 3,000 a day, right? We immediately got hit with mass tax foreclosures.
And I might as well say the fall as well, because it really didn't taper off until the weather got cold.
Right. For tax foreclosures, right? And we were in the streets for that. We were in the streets for like an entire year, and it didn't matter. We have to mount a serious campaign to be able to confront the moratorium ending, and to be able to push the water affordability plan before that goes. Because everybody I know is like, they've got accumulated bills, and it's just going
to.
And because we're still in the middle of a pandemic,
and in my opinion, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because with these new variants coming out, we don't know how that's going to affect our community and our ability to get out into our communities and do things. We might go right back into another lockdown. And the thing that angers me the most is that I want our viewers to understand this is not just us talking propaganda. That's what you get from the politicals. What they're literally doing is playing Russian roulette with people's lives and deciding who they pull the trigger on and who they let survive. And it's absolutely, absolutely unconscionable for people to be expected to live without water, running water, in the midst of a major metropolitan city where you need to have sanitization and just the simple basic fact of that the human body can only live 3 to 4 days without water. And you want people to choose between maintaining their household and paying a water bill, or feeding their children and paying a water bill, or buying medicine and paying a water bill, is absurd when we have a plan that can be put into place that will make sure that they get revenue, because getting something from people that you weren't getting anything from is better than getting nothing from anyone. It
It's
just needs to be implemented.
It's 12:30, so I want to wrap it up, but I want to hand it back over to you, Dr. Hammer, to kind of, to bring it home for folks. What do folks need to know about the Water Affordability Plan? And, your last thoughts.
Yeah, first, I couldn't say it better than Nicole did. I mean, just about what the stakes are. So, I mean, that's probably the best framing of it. I would just remind people that we're not going to have real sustainability until we have a regional water affordability plan, and that we might fight for Detroit first, and we should, and that may be the first step. But if we're not fighting for regional equity and demanding regional justice, we're never going to get to the root causes and have the sustainability that we deserve.
Of course. I'm sorry, my house is wide open because all the windows are open. I'm sorry. That's thank you. That's both of you. This is a really, really important conversation. I want to have it again in the next couple months when we kind of understand the situation that people are in, with and what it's going to look like when the moratorium ends. And hopefully we can come together and really organize something very, very strong where we can show our power, the power that we might not know we have, but we do have it. We've seen it. And
Absolutely.
City, we've accomplished a lot.
I just wanted to say one quick thing to our viewers. I am not trying to influence anyone, but I want to put the facts out there. Do not underestimate that this entire moratorium on water shutoffs, as well as the one that was in place on evictions, are definitely a political move because it's an election year as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for having this conversation, and thank you to everyone who came and tuned in and who tune in every week. We appreciate you. Next week's going to be really great. We're going to be talking about Indigenous water rights and protecting the Great Lakes. It's going to be fantastic. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hammer. And thanks, Nicole, for always being my co-host. I couldn't get that out in the beginning. I couldn't get co-host out. I don't know what was happening, but thank you. And I do want to say that Rosalind Walker would be with us, but her mom passed. And so she's taken a couple weeks, but she'll be back in a couple weeks to help co-host the Water Wednesday. So everybody keep her in your heart. And until next week, take care of each other, protect the water, organize, organize, organize.
Absolutely. Bye.